vampires. They're creatures that have captivated us since time immemorial. Gaunt, pale, terrifying creatures of the night that want to lure you in and drain you of all your precious blood. Nosferatu, Dracula, Selma Hayek, that one chick you knew that was super into Twilight, that one guy behind the 7-Eleven, that one girl that wore vampire fangs to school every day and tried to bite you. Yeah, you know the one. They've all helped to cement vampires as creatures to be feared and reviled. Except Apple. Apple is really cool. But what if vampires did not relish in their blood-stained actions? What if they were actually noblemen, consigned by fate to rule over a crumbling and corrupt empire? What if their bloodthirsty activities were actually part of an elaborate plot spanning centuries? What if the only thing that could save them is a ghost and a paradox? Well, one such series delves into these questions, and it's a series that I care very much about. So, if you will, take a journey with me. We'll uncover secrets, drink blood, reave souls, bend time and reality, and perhaps get a taste of that bitter illusion. Come with me through the land of Nosgoth as I tell you all about the Legacy of Kain. The Legacy of Kain series is a series of action-adventure dark fantasy games initially developed by Silicon Knights and later developed by Crystal Dynamics. It follows the actions of characters surrounding Kain, a nobleman turned vampire in the medieval-inspired land of Nosgoth. Now, this is a gross oversimplification, and many Legacy of Kain fans don't really mention this, which I don't know why. I don't see this as a bad thing. But you could see the Legacy of Kain series as a darker, brooding, more eloquent Western cousin to the Legend of Zelda series. Both protagonists of the series are assigned a quest by fate. Both of them wield a legendary sword. Both of them take place in fantasy lands with two-syllable names. Both of them contain symbols of power and order that need to be found or restored in order to save the land. Both of them feature time travel, and I mean Legend of Zelda, Legacy of Kain. It's a little bit on the nose there. Now, when I say this, I don't say it as a bad thing. It only makes sense that The Legend of Zelda would have a huge influence on the Legacy of Kain series, either directly or indirectly. It's the biggest fantasy action-adventure game around. It only makes sense that Crystal Dynamics would draw inspiration from it. However, while they do have a lot in common, I would say that the Legend of Zelda games are really more self-contained narratives. There's really no overarching story. Moreover, I'd say the Legend of Zelda narratives are, well, pretty cut and dry. Link is chosen to fight Ganon or some other big bad and save Hyrule or Lorule or Termina or whatever from some major calamity. But what if Link was unable to fulfill the destiny laid out for him? What if he was unable to stop Hyrule from falling into jeopardy? What if Link really never wanted to be a hero in the first place, but through twisting political intrigue and machinations, he was robbed of this choice before he was even born? What would he do then? What kind of anger would well up inside him? What if he had to change fundamentally who he was as a result of some higher power he never knew? This is where the Legacy of Kain games differentiate themselves. Legacy of Kain has a larger, overarching narrative spanning all the games. Well, most of them anyway. What I'd like to do is go through all the Legacy of Kain games that I have played and discuss the narratives, themes, and characters and what I like about them. So, let's begin. Blood Omen, The Legacy of Kain, introduces us to the series' namesake character, as well as some other important characters that will come up later in the series, such as members of the Circle, Vorador, and establishing the setting of Nosgoth, a medieval European-style country that is ruled by different smaller kingdoms, but kept in balance by 9 pillars, known as the Pillars of Nosgoth. However, the pillars, before Kain's time, had been corrupted, causing the land to be fraught with danger, betrayal, and monsters. Kain, a nobleman from the city of Corhagen, is killed on his way home one night. However, he is resurrected and turned into a vampire by the Guardian of Death, Mortanius. After having taken revenge on his assassins, Kain discovers that his death was at the behest of one of the other members of the Circle, and that by killing all of them, he will no longer be a vampire. In terms of presentation and mechanics, this game is perhaps the most Zelda-like of any of the series. There are multiple different abilities Kain possesses, from projectile weapons, magic spells, potions, weapons, different kinds of armor, and different kinds of transformations. The view is top-down, much like older Zelda games, but with 3D sprites, which gives it a sort of Diablo-esque look. In fact, when I was playing this game for the first time with friends, a lot of friends asked me if I was playing Diablo. Not that I would ever play any Blizzard game anytime soon. In terms of themes and story, I'd say that this game is where it's at its most dark, violent, and edgy. Kain is in pain, sure, but he also is arrogant and seems to revel in the violence he so readily dishes out.
Ironic. By going back in time and altering the past, you turned William the Just into the Nemesis.
Aye, you have seen my plan, vampire, as I've seen your destiny. The future says you die.
But I am dead. As are you.
Ain't no mercy, ain't no mercy.
Bay Victor!
Got that purple Lamborghini lurking.
Also, I hope you like the phrase Ve Victus, because you're gonna hear it a lot throughout this game. Isn't it technically supposed to be pronounced Vi Victus? Hey, you know that scene from Terrifier 2 with the salt and the bleach? Yeah, that's gonna happen to you if you keep on talking. In the end, Kain learns that he was used, targeted by Mortanius, and turned into a vampire so that he could kill the members of the Circle, and tricked by the Time Guardian Mobius into killing King William, and thus spurring a crusade against the vampires. On top of this, Kain learns that he is the last Balance Guardian. He was chosen upon the death of Ariel, the previous Balance Guardian, to take up the mantle. This places Kain in an impossible position. He can either kill himself, thus restoring the pillars and giving birth to new guardians, but as a result wiping out all vampires in Nosgoth, or he could refuse the sacrifice, thus resulting in him ruling over the ruins of a crumbling and corrupted empire. It was always meant to be the player's choice, but the team at Crystal Dynamics had different plans in mind and chose the latter option for the series as the canonical decision. Thus, Blood Omen serves as the fulcrum upon which the entire series functions. All future games in the series will draw on this moment, the moment where Kain refused the sacrifice. And you may think, this is a selfish decision. Why would Nosgoth be better with bloodsuckers running around? Well, as we'll soon find out, there's much more to Kain's choice than blind arrogance. This is the start of his legacy. For the sequel to Blood Omen, Crystal Dynamics would take complete control this time, not working with Silicon Knights. However, they were placed in a pretty difficult position. How do you create a game that is a sequel to a game that ended in a player's choice? Ultimately, what they would do is take a game that they were currently working on called Shifter and turn that into the sequel to Blood Omen. The head of the Shifter team, Amy Hennig, had actually worked on Blood Omen a little bit before. Little did we know at the time, she would become the head of the rest of the Legacy of Kain series. The sequel that ended up being the Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, she would consider her opus. Kain is deified. 1,000 years hence, and Kain's empire continues to decay. After making the decision to rule over a crumbling Nosgoth, Kain brought to life 6 vampires from the corpses of Seraphan knights to serve him in his new empire: Malchiah, Rahab, Torel, Duma, Sephon, and the deuteragamist of the series, and personally my favorite character, Raziel. Having served Kain for over 1,000 years and developed a close relationship with him, Raziel is the firstborn of Kain's vampire children. However, in time, he develops an interesting mutation, a pair of bat-like wings on his back. However, Kain, being the arrogant and powerful being that he is, rips the bones from Raziel's wings and tosses him into the lake of the dead. Oh, by the way, all water hurts vampires in this universe. Raziel swirls around, burning for centuries, until finally being revived by an enigmatic deity that tells Raziel to rid Nosgoth of Kain and his other vampire children.
Use your hatred to reave their souls. I can make it possible. Become my soul reaver. My angel of death.
On a technical level, Soul Reaver is a massive jump from Blood Omen. I mean, you go from a top-down, sprite-based game into a fully 3D modeled, reality-bending platform action-adventure game. It's really quite a feat. Even playing this game 20-plus years later, the mechanics have always impressed me. Being that Raziel is now a wraith, he can travel between the realm of spirits, the spectral realm, and the material realm at whim. The game uses this mechanic to great effect, making it possible for you to solve puzzles, traverse previously inaccessible areas, and gain health. However, as I detailed in my review of Soul Reaver, link in the description, the mechanics here are still very new and not quite as polished as later entries in the series. Narrative-wise, Soul Reaver is perhaps the lightest on story and background that the other games in the Legacy of Kain series have produced. Raziel goes around slaying his vampire brethren and ultimately finding Kain in a time-streaming chamber, only for him to tell him the story isn't over yet. Now, I understand why they did this. They were really crunched on time, and they had to cut like a third of the game's content in order to get it out on time. But it is very interesting to leave the game on a to-be-continued screen. However, despite all its narrative differences, I do still really enjoy Soul Reaver, and many people agree with me because it became a runaway smash hit. Many people were wondering how the series would continue afterward. Being that the people wanted the long-awaited conclusion to the game that they loved so much, the Soul Reaver team over at Crystal Dynamics was given a much stricter deadline for creating the sequel: 2 years, A very quick turnaround, so quick in fact that an entire console dropped out of the race in doing so. Rest in peace, Dreamcast version of Soul Reaver 2. But within those 2 years, they've really knocked it out of the park. While mechanically speaking, Soul Reaver 2 shares a lot with its predecessor, it is much better visually, auditorily, and also narratively. In fact, I'd argue that the Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver 2 is where the series is its most lore-heavy, narratively, and thematically dense. This game is really where they tried to bridge the gap between the Soul Reaver games and the continuity of Blood Omen, revisiting many characters that showed up in Blood Omen, such as Mobius and Vorador, as well as meeting some characters that were only briefly mentioned in Blood Omen, such as Janus Audron. We learned that vampires were once an angelic race that entered into an epic war with a demonic race known as the Hilden. The ancient ancestors of the vampires created the Pillars and the Reaver to banish the Hilden to another dimension. However, before being banished, the vampires are cursed with eternal life, sterility, and bloodlust. As a result, many of the human inhabitants of Nosgoth come to fear the vampires, in fact, many of them wanting them dead. A theme that's presented in Soul Reaver 2 that I really love is how prejudice and blind hatred is very destructive and ultimately hurts everyone in the process. Janus Audron is a character who's been tormented the entirety of his very long life, ultimately being killed at the hands of some ignorant human soldiers. But he still holds out hope for the future.
The Pillars choose their guardians from birth, Raziel, and vampires are no longer born. This is the crux of our dilemma, and this is the terrible irony. With their vampire purge, the members of the Circle have assaulted the very architects of the Pillars they are sworn to protect. They have embarked on a treacherous path. With every vampire they kill, the humans are slitting their own throats. They know I'm up here, beyond their reach, and it terrifies them. You can see how they flaunt their kills to torment me, or perhaps simply to lure me out. They have this foolish notion that destroying me will somehow topple our entire bloodline. Thankfully, we're not that fragile.
Mankind seems to have brought you only torment and grief. You must hate them.
They fear what they don't understand, and they despise what they fear. But no, I do not hate them.
Vorador does.
He has suffered much. He cannot forgive them.
Should they be forgiven?
They don't understand what they're doing. They are simply unenlightened and vulnerable to manipulation.
It's with this that we realize that Kain's decision wasn't really all that selfish. He did it not just for the good of his own species, but for the good of Nosgoth as well. And Raziel realizes that this drive to kill Kain actually really isn't all that helpful. It's only benefiting the people that are pulling the strings.
And what about Kain? You're leaving your core behind.
You kill him if it's so damned important.
In the end, Raziel also discovers his own destiny. He is the ravenous spirit that inhabits the Soul Reaver, and he is preordained to remain in a time loop forever, being the driving force behind the blade. However, before his soul can be fully imbued into the Reaver completely, Kain saves him, thinking that this is his edge, his third coin toss. However, the strain on history proves to be too powerful, bringing back the Hilden into Nosgoth. Thus, Kain and Raziel struggle to find their next move, and Raziel realizes that his destiny is not denied, but just postponed. For history abhors a paradox. Defiance is a bittersweet experience for me. Sweet in that it is the perfect blend of narrative and very interesting mechanics that I've always wanted the series to have, but bitter in that it's the last Legacy of Kain game we've gotten over 20 years ago. Here, both the teams that worked on Soul Reaver and Blood Omen joined together to make the best of both games. Oh, what about Blood Omen? Oh, you thought I forgot about Blood Omen 2? Oh, no. Oh. That's a good one. That's a really good one.
Kain, I'm dying.
Yes, you are.
I need your blood. Please, you can save me.
I know. Tell me, child, do you see me ruling Nosgoth?
Yes, I see it now.
And do you believe that Nosgoth rightly belongs to me?
I do. I believe it, Kain. Please.
Then you may die, knowing the truth.
No!
You should never have betrayed me. You could have been my queen.
Goodbye to the people who hated on me. Goodbye to the people who loved me. Goodbye to the people who trusted me. Goodbye to everybody.
Mind you, I haven't actually played Blood Omen 2. I just, I'm not overly enthusiastic about playing it. Mechanically speaking, Defiance differentiates itself from Soul Reaver, being not an action-adventure game, but a style action game, clearly being influenced by Devil May Cry, having fixed camera angles, combos, and other such things. On top of this, it's the only game in the series where you play as both Kain and Raziel, with certain sections of the game being only playable to one or the other. I know that they were meant to control relatively the same, but I feel that Kain's attacks are a lot heavier and he's a lot more slow-moving, while Raziel is fast and attacks are much faster and brief. In short, and in my own parlance, Kain is like Donkey Kong and Raziel is like Diddy. Narratively speaking, this game is the culmination of the entire story leading up to this point. Kain and Raziel learn of two champions, one of the ancient vampires and one of the Hilden, one destined to save Nosgoth and the other to destroy it. Raziel fights Janus Aldrin, who is possessed by the Hilden Lord, Terrell, which Raziel didn't get to kill in Soul Reaver 1 because it was cut content, Mobius, twice, and ultimately Raziel learns that the only way that he can save Nosgoth is to let the Reaver consume him. Kain is horrified by this, but as a result, he's finally purified and can see the Elder God, fighting him nearly to death. In the end, Kain is grateful for Raziel's decision, giving him hope for the future of Nosgoth and the vampires, and the humans, the curtain closing on the series ever since. An uncertain but positive conclusion to an otherwise very dark series. There's a lot to love about the Legacy of Kain series. There's the voice acting work of Simon Templeman, who seems to bring his all to every single role he does.
Which means that ending death effectively ends life. Throws off the entire cosmic design, the whole point. And for what? A single fleeting life.
Let's drop the moral posturing, shall we? We both know there's no altruism in this pursuit. Your reckless indignation led you here. I counted on it. There's no shame in it, Raziel. Revenge is motivation enough. At least it's honest. Hate me, but do it honestly.
To the really great work of Michael Bell as Raziel, which, by the way, if you think this voice sounds familiar,
My once proud kin wiped from this world like excrement from a boot. I knew the hand that wrought this deed.
That's because it's the same voice actor as these characters.
Been a slight financial reversal.
Reversal?
It turns out the ear was actually increases waxy buildup in the ear canal. The company, well, it kind of went bankrupt.
Drew, how much of my money did you put into this cockababy ear whiz thing?
About half.
What?
Just kidding, just kidding. Actually, nearly all of it. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
As well as the amazing writing, both from the Silicon Knights team and the Crystal Dynamics team. Amy Hennig really put her all into this series, as well as Dennis Diak, who worked on the original Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, as well as the music being really good. In fact, Soul Reaver was worked on by Kurt Harland, the lead guy on Information Society. But I think what I really love about the series is what it says about fate and how people act in the face of adversity and calamity. Where many fantasy adventure series set you before a calamity, Legacy of Kain puts you in the aftermath of one. But in spite of the circumstances that fate has tossed their way, Kain and Raziel continue to fight against the powerful forces that would see the world crumble before them. So many of the major players in Nosgoth, the Elder God, Mobius, Mortanius, are lying, cheating, corrupted, and duplicitous schemers, selfishly sucking the life and hope from the world just so that they can rise above all the rest. But in a land full of duplicity and deceit, loyalty and friendship is radical. In a world full of forced fates and preordained catastrophes, defiance is an act of integrity. In a world consigned to decay through the machinations of gods and demons, the search for healing, truth, and justice is profoundly needed. Raziel and Kain are not perfect by any metric. They've maimed, they've killed, they've acted impulsively and in their own self-interests from time to time. But what I like about the both of them is they reject the hand they've been dealt. They're still tossing their coin, the bitterest feeling of hope overwhelming them as they see it meet the earth below. They refuse to let fate decide who they are, what they do, and what kind of world they're gonna live in. They still fight to restore Nosgoth from total collapse. We live in a world where the powers that be want to tell you who to be, who you can be with, what you can do with your own body, and refuse to acknowledge any material or environmental ills of the world and force their own will on all of us. In times like this, where all hope seems lost, I find the themes of the Legacy of Kain series to be deeply resonant and profoundly powerful. Kain and Raziel did not submit to their own destinies, for doing so would spell the end of Nosgoth. It only benefits those who would see us defeated, broken, and destroyed to give up hope now and not try for a better future. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And when the dictators and malefactors of this world finally vanish, and their living constituents must answer for the evil they have wrought, begging for a mercy that they never once afforded you, you need only look them in the eye and utter 2 words: Vae Victus.